The amount of change that I've seen just in the year and a half since Claude 3 came out has been dramatic. I don't think the models look remotely similar a year ago to the way they do today. And it's just like we're barely getting started.
Why is coding, in your opinion, the benchmark? Like, what makes it such a critical capability that every major AI lab is intensely focused on it?
It's because engineers love building products for other engineers and for themselves, and they can evaluate the quality of the output. Claude Code came about because we wanted to experiment, like our customers, with an agentic loop, with coding, and seeing how long we could get the models to code for productively. Getting from here to there is simply easier now, but it's not any less important to know where you're pointed. I don't know what the future looks like, but I expect it to be faster and faster and faster as we get better and better and better at the research.
So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So, Michael, for folks who don't know your background, you have spent some time, almost like, more than a decade working across product in different types of companies. Maybe for the audience, what are like one or two really interesting products before Anthropic you have worked on, which you were very excited about? Like maybe just giving them a context on your background.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. I started my career as a software engineer. I was building network management tools at Cisco Systems, but again, not as a product manager, not on the business side, but I was implementing SNMP monitoring for racked and stacked routers and switches at the biggest networking company in the world. But more recently, I was working at a company called Datadog, where I own the infrastructure monitoring product and all the integrations with the infrastructure tools and platforms people run their web applications on. And there, I had quite a bit of fun. I loved that role and that company. And I got deeply embedded with the Kubernetes community, and I maintain a fascination of the multi-tenant problems that arise in distributed systems as a result of that.
So, Michael, you lead like Anthropic's API platform team, and you also work very closely with like the coding team, as well as a lot of clients who use the API, like Cursor, etc. Can you tell us a bit more about like how Claude's like new models are in this space? What are you doing internally so people can really contextualize the work you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work on the API platform, which means that I offer inference, cloud inference, or infrastructure to my customers, right? Our customers are also people like GitHub Copilot or Cursor, who offer code generation to their customers. And code generation is interesting specifically because it takes such a wide variety of forms, right? We know that LLMs are exceptionally good at writing code, probably human level at this point. It can be argued whether it's better than most humans or not as good yet. But either way, the code being written by LLMs makes its way to production very, very commonly. Whole code bases are 30% generated code at this point, from what we've seen, more even in some cases. But 30% is not uncommon. This has expressed itself in a lot of ways in my experience. There are the replets of the world that or the bolts of the world that offer a all-in IDE, a developer experience where you don't necessarily have to be an expert. If you have an idea and you're an entrepreneur, you can probably whip up a web server really quickly, have it hosted for you, and offer a new service to customers who never had access to that service before, just because you're a product manager or a salesperson, or you know what you want to bring into the world. And then on the other side, with Cognition or GitHub Copilot or Cursor, this is where a professional engineer lives in these IDEs every day. It generates high code environments that they can look at, debug, rewrite, iterate on, and ultimately put through unit tests and put into production in a way that is maintainable. They have to keep it up. They hold the pager, which means that if it goes down at 3 o'clock in the morning, they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to fix it because their businesses are suffering, and those businesses are hundreds of millions of dollars, billion-dollar businesses written on this code. So like I say, based on the quality of the models these days, it can be expressed for coders of different levels and in different ways. And we see a whole spectrum of non-overlapping customers putting these things in the field. Does that make sense?
No, that definitely makes sense. So I think like one thing we've been seeing in the industry is that there's a big focus on making coding better with AI, right? Like Why is coding, in your opinion, the benchmark? Like, what makes it such a critical capability that every major AI lab is intensely focused on it?
That's a good question. So, first of all, one of the easiest answers is simply that the models are very good at it, but I think that's too simple an answer because I think part of the reason you see so much coding in production is because engineers love building products for other engineers and for themselves, and they can evaluate the quality of the output. So, if we go back to a medical researcher, somebody like Novo Nordisk or my example in Thomson Reuters, if the output of the model is slightly different, and because it is stochastic, it will be slightly different, it can no longer be checked against a literal string from previous output. And the engineer at the keyboard can't assess whether or not a trivial change to the output is a material change to the legal representation, to the law, right? And so like it's just harder as an organization because an attorney has to sit with an engineer to build the product and assess the output, and some companies aren't set up like that, so they have to do reorganizations and process changes. And in the meantime, it's only been 6 months since agents have been possible. And these coding companies are shipping things to production every day because again, I think it's because it self-evaluates. But I do think that the intelligence generalizes to non-coding domains like legal research, like medical research, like content creation. That's going to make its way to production, and we're going to hear more and more and more about that as well. The other thing is that coding is just cross-cutting. We talk about verticalization all the time, and coding isn't a verticalized, right, solution. People who do medical research write Python scripts. People in investment banking write software. Everybody writes software in the modern world. Almost every company in the world has a CTO and a software engineering department. And so the fact that it is so widely applicable, also it's just like very, very easy to get very excited about the benefits.
One other question which kind of this crops up is that the AI landscape is incredibly competitive, right? There are multiple great AI labs approaching this problem from the big large giants like a Google's and Microsoft's of
Yep.
the world. Do you guys, from a product strategy perspective, how does Anthropic carve out its unique identity and value proposition? Like you kind of talked about like Cursor, Thomson Reuters being your client. Like what do you guys kind of think about from that perspective?
That's a great question. I describe my job, and this is speaking a little bit personally as only part of the organization, as infrastructure. And I speak that way frequently and intentionally, right? Because the interaction with the customer takes place with my customer, with the business producing the product. My domain is really the model's intelligence. And when I get a feature request, when I get pressed, when I get complaints, it's because of model intelligence and not the button is in the wrong place or I didn't understand how to do something. Like my customers are exceptionally professional. They're very good at what they do. They stay at the forefront of the state of the art, and they press me to get even further than the state of the art. And I think the niche that we've carved out in being the intelligence company in the artificial intelligence domain is in part because of those pressures from our customers as infrastructure providers. We do certainly have our own clients also, but even that is a result of a lot of this, right? Claude Code came about because we wanted to experiment like our customers with an agentic loop, with coding and seeing how long we could get the models to code for productively, right? Like right now, I think the current publicly referenceable number is that the model has gone out and coded for 7 hours and written good code asynchronously, which means that we can now just, like, assign a Jira ticket to the LLM, keep doing other work, and wait for it to come back, right? And because we wanted to experiment the way our customers were, with the model intelligence, that's how Claude Code came about too.
We love like Claude overall, right? Like especially we find it really good for like writing.
Yeah,
Actually, like, Zen and I use it a lot. Like we use it in our content product, and it's very interesting. Like the 3.7, like the thinking loop would sometimes find the answer and just keep going. But 4.0 has solved that problem. I was like, we were so delighted to see that. Like that's just like a note to like, hey, that's awesome. That's like one issue we have found with 3.7 in our use cases. But that was great. Zen, over to
no, and
you.
that's such
Yeah.
good feedback, right? That's part of why we expose the thinking loop to begin with, is so that you can steer it or you can give us feedback, and that's that sort of thing, right? Even though it's not part of the sampling output, it's not part of the answer. Seeing how the model is thinking and introspecting and being able to steer it to your ends is actually a feature of the product.
For a lot of folks, Claude is 3.7 is like their favorite coding model. I think 4 is maybe replacing 3.7 now. But as a non-technical person, Hassan is technical. He leads the engineering team, but I'm sort of on the growth side. I'm a content creator myself as well. I'm a writer as well. Claude is phenomenal at Sonnet especially is just phenomenal at writing. There's nothing quite like it on the market. Just as an example, someone on my team recently just one-shotted like a post and they put it on social media and they got over 10,000 likes and over like a million impressions. It was like literally not a word of it was like changed. Obviously, he came with the idea, but here's what my last post looks like. Create something like this. Got it like one shot, no changes. Had over 10,000 likes, and we're kind of like all just sitting there, mind blown by this.
Yeah.
Then I was recently talking to a best-selling author. I don't know if I should say their name, so I won't say their name, but I think if I said their name, most folks would recognize them. So like, tons and tons of books. And when I showed them what Claude can do in terms of writing, research, finding anecdotes, editing, so on and so forth, they were just kind of mind blown. Like they, during that 1 hour call with me, went from this AI thing is a gimmick to like, holy cow, what is going on right now?
That's so
So
wonderful.
yeah, so I just wanted to like throw it back to you. It's like I understand, why getting good at coding is so important, but it feels like Plot is amazing at writing. Anthropic doesn't really talk about it. Is this intentional or is it just because, it's like you guys want to stick to the message of coding at this point?
We do spend quite a bit of time on Claude character. There's a team who thinks about Claude's character all the time, and we are quite proud of it. And it's always very nice to hear when people say that because that is an intentional choice. And it's funny that like, I mean, I personally certainly at work. We have an internal Slack integration, and I use the models to write my own performance review as a little bit of an experiment. But I just said, like, look at what I talk about among my DMs, use my credentials, look at my Slack, tell me how I'm doing. And it worked, like you say, phenomenally. It was a lot of fun to see it write in its voice, adapt my voice when I asked it to, based on the fact that it did see my writing, and build this review for me. It was it
Yeah,
was it was
yeah.
fun.
So we're seeing like this thing now, like natural language now lets you communicate with LLMs, and LLMs do all these things. It puts out code, or maybe you put in code, and then it kind of spits out text on the other end. You can kind of do it both ways. But for a lot of folks, like code is becoming accessible for the first time. You talked about Lovable, and there's Bolt, and there's Replit, and there's all these other products coming in. To me, like what's really interesting about the writing part of this stuff is like if a writing model is better, it kind of also means that it's better at understanding you. And if the output is good, it also kind of means that it makes you a better communicator,
Yeah.
right? So if a lot of, building in the future, obviously engineers are going to be valuable, developers are going to be valuable because they just know more. But for folks who are coming in who are going to start building, whether it's low code products, no code products, or just products, micro products for themselves, like a model that understands you better, helps you communicate better, just I think sort of, is the whatever the equivalent of having the best coding model would be in my opinion. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm stretching the analogy a little bit, but I don't know. Maybe you've given some thought to this.
I mean, like I was saying earlier, I do think that the way we speak in code and the ability to think in code accrues generally to the model's intelligence. So historically, we have found that the smarter the model gets, the smarter the model gets, in sort of a general way, and that does continue to hold. And some of our best customers are the Notions of the world, the Canvas of the world that are creating content either for private purposes or for publication
Yeah.
on behalf of those
Yeah.
customers. But we
Yeah.
we do see this, like you say, every day, and I do think for entrepreneurs especially, it gives them a bit of a force multiplier while they're getting started. If they're a very good engineer, they can augment themselves in their go-to-market, in their content marketing, in how they communicate with the world. If they know exactly how they want to communicate their product and they're having trouble building it, it can help with that. But the intelligence accruing generally has benefited the startup ecosystem quite a bit.
18 months ago, uh, the app layer was like, openly mocked. They were called GPT wrappers and so on. And if you're working on an app company, you just weren't a serious person, to be honest, because we were building an app company. So that's a lot of the feedback that we got. But in the
Yeah.
last, 6 to 12 months, the conversation has now shifted, right? now people are saying it's the models that are going to get commoditized, and the app layers where all the value capture is going to happen. So I just wanted to get your take on it, like how, right now, like there's a slow emerging consensus that the model layer might get commoditized, and all these models are going to converge at the same point.
Yeah.
And all the value capture is going to happen on the app layer, and it feels like kind of reactionary a little bit, if I'm being honest. But I just wanted to get your sort of, take on what do you think is really going on, and if models aren't going to get commoditized, why aren't they going to get commoditized?
The rapper metaphor never really landed with me, to be honest. The people building businesses who have been building those businesses for decades, sometimes a century, the people who have deep experience in things like medical research that I do not have, right, are going to use the model's general intelligence with their domain in their domain better than I'm going to use it. And dismissing those companies as rappers is like wildly inappropriate to me. I think that those clients are going to express something unique for their customers, and AI is relevant in helping them do that, in doing the analysis that they know needs to be done, in giving the data the context that they uniquely have in their databases that they've been collecting for decades, right? And pairing again their domain expertise or process expertise or customer expertise and whatever expertise they have in their niche with the intelligence of the model to build an application that's relevant directly to a customer. I also, in my light arrogance, do not think that we've seen a lot of commoditization at the intelligence layer, at the general intelligence layer. I don't think the models look remotely similar a year ago to the way they do today, and there's it's just like we're barely getting started. To me, like the amount of change that I've seen just in the year and a half that I've been working on this product since Claude 3 came out, has been dramatic, and it changed between Claude 3 and 3.5 version 1 in 6 months to 3.5 version 2 in 6 months to 3.7 in 6 months. There was like a little bit of a
Yeah.
linear relationship, and to 4 in 2 months. And I don't know what the future looks like, but I expect it to be faster and faster and faster as we get better and better and better at the research. So the frontier is going to look very different. And the other thing is that we've been talking about coding, so I'm going to lean into that metaphor. We've been doing coding this entire time, but last June, coding looked like hitting tab and getting the rest of a line. And then by August, it was asking and iterating with the intelligence to write whole functions. And today, like I say, it's assigning a Jira ticket for 7 hours. So even sort of like talking about coding as a commoditized use case, or the intelligence as a commoditized use case, belies the fact that it's changing dramatically, and what you can do in terms of economic value with the model accelerates with time. If anything, we're only getting into a more volatile space where the change is happening more and more rapidly, to be honest, and there's less and less commoditization.
How close are we to superintelligence, or how past do you think we are? I know that's a big question. The reason why I ask this is, like, to me as a user, in some parts, it's clearly better than I am in certain capabilities, right? Like in certain kind of writing tasks is better than me. I know
Yeah.
that in certain kind of mathematical tasks, it's way better than me. It might not be conscious, no matter, depends on how we're gonna describe it. It might not yet be capable of true creativity in the sense that David Deutsch and Karl Popper and some philosophers talk about it. But does that really even matter? Like, intelligence is intelligence. And just to bring it back to to the first question is, like, do you feel like superintelligence is here and we maybe haven't woken up to it yet, or maybe or do you think I'm overstating the case for it?
Yeah, it's a fun question that I'm happy to, like, spin on sometime, but, I don't have, like, I am not an expert in what makes cognition
Sure.
cognition, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or
Yeah.
what I do know is, like you say, it's better than me in the domains that I am not an expert in. I still feel a little bit ahead of it in the domains that I am an expert in, and I think a lot of people feel that way, where, like, it is better than most people in the things that they're not good at this point, and especially things where it's running ahead of perceptions, like in coding, like in content creation and things like that. So I think as a tool, we're definitely at a place where it is an effective tool for most people in order to accelerate the work that they're doing. I also think that I was saying earlier, it's a volatile, but it is changing faster and faster. So what we saw between October and now is that people actually removed a lot of code from their applications because what they were doing is saying, Claude, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this in order to accomplish this. And each step could accrue bugs. And it got pretty good at self-correcting those bugs, which meant that the workflow was possible. But today you can actually remove a lot of that code and just say, accomplish this. Think about how to do it and then follow your own pattern, your own instructions. And Claude will actually write better code than the scaffolding and follow its own code to the conclusion of the goal and actually achieve the goal, right? And so I think a lot of people who like learned to prompt a long time ago might actually see that the models are more intelligent than they were then in a way that helps them express expertise that they might not have, and that oversteering it might actually be holding it back a little bit. To your point about perception and reality.
Another sort of like, major debate has been around prompting. Like, some folks are like prompting, it doesn't matter. Once the models get smart enough, it's not going to matter. But, as folks who are sort of like using the APIs and building these products, we spent an absurd amount of time just like taking words here from there and, slightly altering this sentence structure and the paragraph structure and instructions and so on to get like the optimal output. What's your take on that? Do you think like long term is prompting going to be as essential as it is right now? And should
Oh, I would
people
like
really be
the
spending time on
models.
that?
Sorry. Yeah, no, I would like the models to be so steerable, so intelligent that they understand your intention and they achieve your intention. And I think we're getting better and better at that, but prompting is still a skill to some degree. I would really very much like if my customers building applications were to hide that from customers, to help them with the prompting in line with the inputs. This takes many forms. There's a technique called meta prompting, which is like when you take an input and you ask Claude, hey, consider this input, but write your own prompts based on what you think the intention is. And then it
Interesting.
actually can put its own, chain of thought into place. It can put its own role into place in order to disambiguate between homonyms or, whatever it is. But the intelligence, because it's good at writing content, can write content for itself. And I think that's going to be a common pattern until it's so good it doesn't even need to be prompted to do that, right? And again, we are getting to a place where it's very good at reading your intention and answers better and better every day.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in the 4.0, like that intention is like really easy to get across compared to like what it was before, which I love. So Michael, like coming to like kind of if I'm a builder and Claude now Anthropic has launched two new models, Sonnet 4 and Opus 4. How should I be thinking about it? I'm like, hey, I want to build my next application. I have these now two amazing models. Which one should I pick for what?
Yeah, I think if you look at the benchmarks, if you look at something like Swebench or something, both of them write code very well, like categorically well for a moment. But what you'll find with Opus is that that's the model that's going to be able to reflect, introspect, write its own tasks, work on complex tasks for hours, decide for itself when to come back to a human and ask clarifying questions, stuff like that. And Sonnet's going to be very, very good at quickly answering questions, thinking for a while, answering the questions. But I think in the agentic world, in the agentic behavior, Opus is probably going to be the more powerful model, even though they're both equally skilled, or not equally, but materially well suited to answering questions. Does that make sense?
No, I think it makes sense. So if you're willing to, if you have enough time and reasoning is super critical, seems like Opus should be like your go-to. Like if let's say you're like fine
Not
waiting for
just
an
reasoning, but sequence planning also,
secret
right?
planning.
Yes, exactly. If your mode of interaction is to assign it a task like an intern, Opus is going to be a much better intern, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Like you're giving it can plan, it can logically think through it, test different
Test
avenues,
different
come
things.
back.
Exactly,
If it doesn't
exactly.
really work out, comes back, tries something else, and eventually gets you to the right answer and like working through different like pathways. Okay.
Yeah,
I
and
love
it's
that.
quite brilliant. In Claude Code, we see the uptake of Opus being very, very rapid. It's very good at these like long running task based scenarios, goal based scenarios.
And then like another question from a builder's perspective, right? Like so Anthropic obviously has a great partnership with AWS, Snowflake, other companies, cloud companies as well. Should I be thinking about like, hey, I should go to one of these big cloud providers and then build the infra around that and then get Anthropic's model? Well, now Anthropic also has infrastructure which I can directly start putting into my product. Like, how should I be thinking about that?
If I do my job right, you shouldn't have to think too hard. If you're a company and you have an AWS or GCP relationship and you want to use your credits or you want to put the inference close to where you have the storage of your data, God bless. And if you want to use our first party API, there's no reason not to, right? Like I don't want to build a product that makes you think, where should I consume it? I want you to be able to consume it where you want to consume it as easily as possible for the developer. And that's sort of critical for the developer experience, right?
That is amazing. And then, uh, Anthropic's obviously introduced the model context protocol.
Yes, I should have talked about that earlier. Yes, go on. Sorry.
So which has, I think by some people has been called like the USB-C of AI. It's an amazing innovation I think about, right? Like it's like you can port between different things, you can port different client servers. How do you guys are investing in that? It is to some extent open source as well, which is an
It
amazing.
is open source, not just to some extent open
Yes.
source. Yes. And there's yes, exactly. So I was talking a little bit earlier about how domain experts need to supply domain specific data to the model to make it useful, right? You don't want to do legal research based on the training data. You want to do the reasoning about the contextual data based on the training data, but you want to provide the context externally. And this is what the model context protocol is so critical for, right? It's like APIs from traditional software where you can offload the protection of the data, the exposure of the data, the credentialing of the data to the platform owner, to the person who owns the platform. And that means that the application developer has to think about less, fewer variables. The platform owner is confident that what they're exposing is what they intend to expose, and they can work together to build an application that has access to data. And this is why we now have more than 3,000 different integrations and different
Wow.
MCP servers in the ecosystem, because people want their data to be accessible to agents. They just want to be able to control that access and help those agents access their data in the right way at the right time. And between the contextual data, the knowledge in the real world, and the prompts and training data in the model, those will come together in order to solve problems. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So maybe we take like some tangible example. Is there like
Yes.
an enterprise company which is doing this today and is offering it to maybe some of its application layer or maybe its own customers, which you're like, hey, this is an amazing application of FCP and we're excited to support this?
Tons. I guess I'll call out Asana or Atlassian. There are many project management tools in this type, and for the LLM to have access to a user's daily tasks and be able to do those tasks is critical, right? Those aren't
Yeah.
trained into the model data. You don't want to tell the model what you're doing today. You can just give it access to your Asana board, to your Jira board, and have it know what you're trying to accomplish with your day and tell it which ones to solve. We integrate with Zapier, so if you want to go off and trigger workflows that are already set up, right? These are ways that allow clients to interact with the real world. And then there are the vertical specific, the domain specific servers, right? The PubMeds of the world, right? Which give people access directly if they have if they're a seat holder, if they have access with their own credentials to the research in that domain and can give Claude access to it.
Those are amazing examples. I think like MCP is such a great way that you can, especially with Zapier, you can trigger workflows and have agents now be part of your workflows, and that makes like life so much easier. Or access research data, you don't need to copy paste or bring it to Claude or some other
Exactly.
intersection, but you can just really do your work there, and it's working out
There are
amazing.
also other issues. Like we talk frequently with people concerned about permissions and permission in data and mixing different layers of permissions. And this allows Claude to impersonate a human, right? Give them your human credentials for the agent, so the agent acts on your behalf instead of with its own tokens, with its own authorization. And that way you can enforce, like, should Michael have access to the data? If not, neither should his agent. You know what I mean?
A lot of the time when I'm talking to the developers in my team and when I talk to just developers in general, um, I think whenever a new model comes out, it's always chart topping in some ways. And recently there's been some controversy around how these models have become chart topping as well. So, a lot of time a model is chart topping, but it's not the model that's actually being used by developers. Developers will still be using a model that's like 6 months old because they find that that's more reliable. So my first, or the first part of my question is, how much attention should developers be paying to benchmarks really? And then the second question is around evals. Like every team we talk to has challenges around evals.
Yeah.
I mean, have you seen any good progress on the eval challenge in recent months?
It's a great question. Those are two two great questions that I will try to answer both of them, but hold me to account. So on the benchmark side, I would say that benchmarks are useful because it helps us express how much better our new model is than our old model, as long as we keep a consistent way of testing against a benchmark. So I think they are very useful in sort of like understanding the progress of the models as they are developed. But I think it's very easy to overfit, to train for a specific benchmark. Like, I am not an academic in this way, but our research team spends quite a bit of time making sure that they're reflecting in the model card the quality of the model and not just the quality of some scaffolding, if that makes sense, that they're not overfitting anything. Um, as a consumer, as a buyer, I think benchmarks are useful in a similar way. It helps you know if you're using, Claude 3.7 Sonnet, sort of what to expect directionally from Sonnet 4. But your evals are always going to matter more, and this is where it dovetails, right? Every customer, if you're a professional, if you're selling a product that's AI enabled, and you're selling the advice of that AI or the content generated from that AI in some way, you should know for your business, for your reputation, for your business, what good looks like, right? And that takes many forms, but that is a product decision as a product manager. That's a product. What good looks like for you is a product decision that should be made affirmatively and mindfully and written down. It should be written down in the form of evaluations and then tested in production, with live evals, offline before production, with offline evals, right? You should check when you upgrade the model, you should make sure you're improving the customer experience, right? The customer doesn't really care if it's this model or that model. They care about the output of your client, of your application. And that's critical. And people do still struggle with that. They struggle with that a lot less than when I started talking to people about their applications a year and a half ago. Um, I just remember this one example where somebody had a Google sheet that I couldn't load on my computer because it was thousands of columns wide, where they were iterating with a subject matter experts on prompt completion, prompt completion, trying to make sure that it was good, and they were refining the prompt and getting it production. That was great behavior, and they did get it to production in a actually like quite enormous way. I think a lot of the people listening to this probably use this product. And it's a very high quality product because they were focused so much on those evaluations, but it was still too painful from my perspective, right? A lot of my first 3 months in the role was focused on building a prompt generator, a prompt improver, an evaluation product in our console, and even a way to generate evaluations just to get somebody started in this way. I think there are a lot of good tools for this these days today, right? I think Prompt Foo is great, Brain Trust is great. They're just like the ecosystem is starting to provide, but still think most customers use internal tools. If I'm a betting man, to be honest, and I would like to provide better and better tools, both myself and to encourage the ecosystem to provide those tools.
For developers who are listening to this, especially like the younger folks who are just getting into the market, are there any particular skills they should be paying attention to right now that you think are going to be really important in the next 6 to 12 months, maybe?
I mean, definitely keeping up with the technology, like start coding now, start using AI now so that as the technology progresses, you're watching it progress, you're understanding what the difference between new generations and old generations are, you're getting an intuitive feel for which features are useful when, right? Like we just released a feature that gives Claude a computer. It can not only sample, it can not only like predict the next token in order to provide a response, but I can actually like decide this is not a question that I can answer, but I can write code to answer it, write that code, run it during the sampling loop, and then continue to sample based on the output. So it can like build its own calculator to divide two 3-digit numbers instead of trying to reason about how to divide two 3-digit numbers, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like understanding why we built that and how to use it, like that's probably going to make your products better. I think actually I started with the secondary concern. The primary concern is traditional. Understand who your customers are, what your business should provide to them, and what success for them looks like, and everything will derive from that. Getting from here to there is simply easier now, but it's not any less important to know where you're pointed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And then just wanted to get your thoughts around the way that the technology is developing now. Not asking specifically about what Anthropic is working on. I know that might be secret, but what do you think is happening in terms of just like general developments in the space right now that you think are going to be very exciting for developers, but maybe even non-developers over the coming 6 to 12 months?
I think it's this goal orientation. I think the smarter Claude gets, right, the more it can ask its own hard questions and rely less and less on the human. And I think from developers to people at home planning a vacation, I don't know. Basically, every single use case will benefit from the person at the keyboard being able to ask about their intention and not think too hard about how to get there and letting the model help them get there. And I think that's very, very exciting.
So outside of Claude, what AI tools are you using regularly for work or personal tasks?
That's a good question. I use Claude in conjunction with a lot of things, right? Like I use Claude with Slack. I do use the Slack AI features
Yeah.
quite a bit. I use content generation features wherever I find them. So I mentioned Notion earlier because they had built a pretty good content generation tool into their product. But I find that the more embedded the AI experience is, the more likely I am to just use it because it's there. The Zoom interaction. I remember the first time actually, it was like magic. The first time and this has happened to everybody, you sort of like black out during a meeting and miss some section because there are too many people in the beehive and you just lost the thread for a second. I did this and I asked Zoom, wait, what did that guy just say? And it answered correctly, and it answered it with
That's amazing.
enough time for me to recover my composure and keep the conversation going. That was a moment where I was like, yes, that's absolutely spectacular. You know what I mean? It just like literally saved my life. Nobody has to know that I blacked out just now. So I use it in many ways, like I say, but often it's in a situation where it's presented to me to solve the problem that the developer knew I had right then.
So AGI, what's your kind of like year where you're like, hey, like we'll definitely cross into the AGI boundary?
I I feel like I am way too close to this question to answer it speculatively, if that makes sense. Like if I
Fair
was
enough.
anybody else, I would just give you an answer, but I don't want to bind Anthropic to an answer to that question.
No, of course. We understand you're representing Anthropic, so fair enough.
It is getting more powerful though, and it will
Yeah.
get very powerful, like
No, I
arbitrarily
think
powerful.
that's a
Very,
fair.
very soon. You know what I mean? We see it in production. We see it all the time now. People are using it in their day-to-day lives, and it's very exciting.
So if we have you back on the show in like 9 to 12 months,
Oh
what AI
man.
capability do you predict will be?
9 to 12 months is so long from now.
So long.
Let's say 6 months.
Certainly, we see a world very quickly where it becomes teams of agents orchestrating very complex tasks, not just like writing code, but coming up with the problems that need to be solved. Like the exponential is moving so quickly that's why I laughed and talked about it being hard to speculate because the last 6 months looks more different than the 6 months before that looked, right? For me,
Yeah.
and I expect that to continue.
No, it's insane. I think the last 6 months were crazy. Like I just like see the last 6 months. I'm like mind blown on the speed of development from 3.5 to
Yeah,
4.0 to some extent it's just crazy.
yeah.
Like it's insane like how models have changed.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
so much you don't see, right? The model's being good at storing its own memories from old interactions, writing them in files based on its own assessment that like this is going to be something interesting to remember and pick back up later. Like there's like a lot going on behind the scenes that accrues into the intelligence.
100%.
Just before we wrap up, is there anything recently that's been top of mind for you that we haven't asked you yet?
I think we talked about a lot of it, but top of mind is how to better help the developer, right? There's this curve, I think, where like people saw AI and they were like, wow, that's cool. I wonder if I can do that. And they couldn't. And then it matured into a point where they could do the things that they had already thought of, but very quickly it matured past where they had ideas. And now there's like significant overhang where people are still doing imperative programming, telling it what to do step by step. They are still thinking in terms of what it was not capable of doing a year ago, that it was capable of doing 6 months ago. And they're not really in a place where they're contemplating what it's capable of today. And what I think about every day, both in how I express the API, but also how I express documentation, how I help people in the community, how we show up at events, how we teach people how to use it. Like, how can I help people move with the speed at which the technology is progressing? I think
Yeah.
is like top of mind for me all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Hassan and I were both at the uh code
The
event a
Code with
couple of
Cloud
weeks ago.
event.
Yeah, code with
Yeah,
Claude event. I think someone on stage might have been you, but so apologies if I don't remember. But it's just the case of if you have a use case that isn't working right now, maybe it's a little expensive, maybe it's a little bit clunky. Just wait a few months, and you'll probably be able to make it work. So don't give up on that feature just yet. And yeah, I agree. Things are progressing, and uh, yeah, it's important to just like catch up, especially for developers. Even on our own team, there's often so many times where we think we're on the cutting edge of everything because we're running a media organization on top of obviously our company, but even we end up missing things just because things are moving that fast. Michael, thank you so much for this. This was one of the most fascinating conversations we've had. We're builders ourselves. There's so many questions that we have, not just from the audience, but just selfishly wanted to ask ourselves. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time, and hopefully we'll have you back on here soon.
absolutely. It was absolute pleasure, both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much.